All units, Irene. I say again, Irene.
Hello viewers, and welcome back to another episode of The Model Guy. If you recognize that clip from the beginning of this video, you have a great taste in movies and recognize it from Blackhawk Down. Maybe you also have flown on those and you now have to sleep with the fan on at night. A little while ago, I was approached by ICM Models and asked if I'd like to build one of their new model sets. Being a huge fan of the Blackhawk, I immediately jumped at that opportunity and was more than happy to receive a kit in the mail to build. You should also know from experience on this channel, I'm not a fan of just box reviews, and in order to properly review a kit, it means that you have to bust open bags and build it, and I'm more than happy to make that sacrifice for you guys. On the sprues, this kit does look fantastic. There's lots of great detail, it's very sharp and crisp, and there's only a few areas that I felt like I could push the kit a little bit more. One of those being an update to the fries bar inside, because I wanted to have the fast ropes attached, and the second one being the auxiliary fuel tanks that are often strapped inside the Hawk. I could have saved my time on the fuel tanks though, because the Gothic Serpent boxing of this kit does include the fuel bladders in the back of the aircraft. This update to the fries bar was pretty simple to do. I just used an old bent airbrush needle, cut it down the size after measuring against the stowed position, and then super glued them in place. The nice thing about these being metal is they're going to stand up to the handling of the kit as it's built. Moving back to the fuel tanks in the back of the aircraft, I included the ratchet straps on the tanks themselves and then just used some tape to create the straps to give it a more fabric look. One early criticism I do have for this kit was assembling the troop seats inside. ICM has you build these and then attach them to the roof of the cabin before lowering it in place and then assembling the sides. That is a lot of moving parts, so I held off gluing anything until I got to that stage of the build. Getting into the history of the H-60 helicopter, I could be here for at least 20 minutes talking about it in each variant, but I'll keep things pretty simple for those of you who may not be familiar with it. The Blackhawk is basically a Ford Transit van. You can have it empty to stow kit, you can put extra seats in to carry around all your friends, or if you live in certain parts of the world, you can strap a machine gun in there to shoot out the doors. The Blackhawk is easily the most versatile helicopter in the world, and a quick check over their wiki page will show you why. Where the Apache helicopter can bring a lot of death and destruction to the battlefield, it can't bring troops. And where the CH-47 can bring a lot of troops to the battlefield, it doesn't really bring any ordnance to drop onto the ground. If you want to be able to do both of those things, the MH-60 Direct Action Penetrator is your answer. The Blackhawk was designed to replace the UH-1 Huey, another iconic helicopter, in 1979. And just like the Huey, the Blackhawk is operated by the US Navy, Air Force, and Army. The Blackhawk is also operated by 38 countries around the world. 39 if you count Afghanistan, but those guys are still trying to figure out how to even start them. Hopefully none of them are playing War Thunder and someone leaks that information. Even as recently as 2025, Canada has leased 2 of them to fly here in Alberta, and I can often find those just south of an hour's drive. Now, for those of you sitting at home that may not have seen a Blackhawk in person, I can highly recommend the movie Blackhawk Down, and even the new documentary on Netflix, Surviving Blackhawk Down. Ridley Scott's movie in 2002 does for the Blackhawk what Top Gun did for the F-14. We've also been very fortunate here in Calgary to see the Blackhawks transitioning in and out of Springbank a couple times, even wearing their skis at one point. Why am I such a fan of helicopters, especially the Blackhawk? Most likely because I grew up in CFB Shearwater where they flew the Sea King out of there, and I even got to ride in one when I was 12 as part of the cadet program. Hanging with your feet outside of the doors, secured by nothing but a monkey tail, and flying just over the treetops and water is one of the most exhilarating things I've ever done in my life. Unfortunately, growing up in Canada, you have a better chance of getting into the NHL than you do of flying helicopters in the Air Force. Why do I like helicopters so much? Well, just the fact that they can hover, fly backwards, sideways, it just seems like a pure sense of flying. Getting back into the build now, you'll see I've been adding some things just to add interest to the kit. Lead wire is always a good one for seatbelts, and then I'm adding styrene just to correct the armor next to the pilots. This armor slides like a window and protects the pilots when they're going into a dangerous area. If you want to install the doors on the kit, you can probably skip this step, but I wanted to have the doors off. Now here comes the most critical part of building this kit, and that's getting the fuselage halves and the cabin assembled. You'll notice here that I do not have my inner frame in place yet on the floor. To get a tighter fit, I was going to install the floor first and then install the rails on the side. There's not much that locates the floor in place. ICM wants you to have this as an entire assembly with the roof and sides first before bringing the fuselage halves in place, but that leaves a lot of potential for problems downstream. I also left the chin windows off the kit at this point just to make it easier to mask them, but that turned out to be a mistake. To get the tail wheel to sit correctly, I had to open up the hole a little bit and shorten the cross shaft for the wheel. Otherwise, I couldn't get the fuselage halves to close completely. Now here you can see the sidewall in place, and the problem is there's not really a positive fit for this to lock into place. There's a lot of slop there, and it can lead to some problems that it's not seated properly. The design of the chin glass is one negative thing I do have to say about the kit. It only positively locks on the one side, and then there's nothing on the other side. There's no frame or anything, it's just the plexiglass, so you have to risk using some super glue or something to secure it to the other side of the plastic. Kinetic does this as well on their F104 model, and it makes it kind of hateful to get glass in with a clean install. When you're also installing the nose and the chin pieces of the helicopter, there's nothing that positively locks those in place. So you have to put the windscreen in as a spacer just to get everything lined up properly before committing to glue. If you just put things on and glue them, you're going to run into trouble. If you take your time and do a lot of test fitting, ICM's done a good job designing where their joints go on the kit, and they end up in areas where you might not even have to clean them because they're out of sight when the model's sitting down. The biggest piece of advice I can give you for this build is when you're putting the fuselage sides in place is to make sure at the front door upper corner the roof is pulled down fully and sits against the bulkhead. If it is not sitting against that bulkhead, you're going to have a lot of problems trying to get this windscreen in place. You can also expect a little bit of a challenge when you're doing the horizontal stabilizer. You do have to open up the holes a little bit because the pins and slots are super tight to get those elevator halves together, but then when you're trying to get it in place, the tabs just do not go into place. I tried cutting them at an angle so they'd force and lock themselves in, but even that didn't work. So I ended up just cutting the tabs off completely. Since I had gone this far with the tail, I decided to also cut off the base for the actuator of the stabilizer and then use some brass rod to replicate it so I could glue it in a downward position. Another gotcha on this kit is when you get to step 53. The instructions here don't actually show you what you should be doing. They show a butt joint for those exhaust halves, but in reality, it's a slot and tab where 26 and 17 should fit together. So just pay attention there. Otherwise, you're going to glue it incorrectly and have a hell of a time trying to fix that mess. Ask me how I know. So here's how step 53 should actually go. This bracket from the exhaust just drops into place and just gives you that little area there to glue. It does not go as a butt joint as shown in the instructions. One deviation that I did do from the instructions is I glued the other half of the shroud in place before mounting to the kit. That way I could clean up the joint and blend it. For filling seams on this kit, I once again went with a rubber superglue and accelerant just so I could clean up those seams and not have to keep revisiting them. They're in some pretty gross places, so it's a lot easier to clean those up before installing the exhaust onto the model. You'll also want to take a second and paint all of this now before you install it, otherwise you're not going to be able to do it once they're in place. To avoid any texture or dusting while painting in tight areas, I'll often leave intakes or exhaust off a model and paint that area behind it first before installing it. This cuts down on any weird vortices that the airbrush is going to hit and start spitting that airstream everywhere. One other area where people have been having trouble with this kit is getting the engine covers in place. This top of the kit does have slots in place that the turbine inlet and outlet have to fit. If those bulkheads sit properly in those slots, as shown here, you shouldn't have any problem getting the cover in place. Before you start worrying about where the gaps are going to be and filling them, check out some reference photos because there's some pretty prominent gaps on the top of the Blackhawk that are actually supposed to be there. This is another variation from how to build the kit, and instead of following the instructions, I'm gluing everything in place onto the kit after test fitting rather than building a sub-assembly and trying to stick that in place. I'm not a big fan of sub-assemblies, especially when the engineering's not super tight. So my recommendation for this build is to put everything in place onto the helicopter itself. ICM does not give you masks in the kit, but they do give you a blueprint in the instructions themselves. So I threw this into my Silhouette Studios, did a quick trace, and then cut it on the plotter. And I uploaded this as well into the H60 build group. And after a few minutes, my masks were ready to go. The nice thing about every other window in the kit is that it has a frame around it, so you have somewhere to work and clean up to glue into place. It is only the chin windows that do not have that. So I just used the kit doors to mask the inside of the kit. Then I took a quick look at the miniguns for the kit, and although they do look okay for being a kit part, they are easily upgraded with a 3D printer. So I went on Cults, and within a few minutes and a few dollars, I had a M134 minigun that I could make fit onto the model. The nice thing about 3D printing is you're not using a mold to produce an item, so you get away from the pitfalls of that, and you can get some pretty tight details. Bodywork was still continuing on Blackhawk as I tried to blend some seams on the engine intakes. And these are just a difficult thing because once they're in place, they're kind of difficult to get into. So then I resort to the old sanding sponge on a toothpick trick. Now, if ResKit's watching, this would be a great area to do some more seamless intakes. One of the downfalls of having great positive details on a kit is when you have to do seam cleanup, you often lose those details. But that wasn't really that hard of a fix using a pin vise and some solder balls. That's right, I use my balls. All you need to do this is a steady hand and to order yourself some soldering balls off of Amazon. And you can find different sizes. I ordered a whole pack, and then I just found the balls that matched the rivet size the best. And then I just put those in place with super glue. Once those were in place and it dried, I then used some super glue to bonder to clean up the area. This is definitely not something you want to attempt while you have a pug puppy sitting in your lap, or your wife is sending you all the memes and stories she's finding on Facebook after she's allegedly gone to bed 45 minutes ago. To replace the handles from the kit, which are a little on the thick side, I used some copper wire and bent it in my PE folding jig. I'm not a big fan of trying to clean up seams, especially on something like grab handles, so this saves me a lot of time in the long run. With the grab handles now completed, I just have to drill out the holes on the kit and then install them with some super glue. That looks a lot more in scale to my eye. Now for painting the MH-60, it's pretty much in the name the color you have to make it, and it's black. However, working with black in a scale model can be challenging. You can't just use pure black because it's too dark, and it also doesn't allow you any room to play with the color. The last time I painted anything black was on my Black Widow, and I didn't exactly do a great job doing that. So for this kit, I started out with black as the primer, and then painted the whole model NATO black. That gives me a little more room to go darker if I want to, and to go lighter. While the base coat was drying and I had the copper wire on the bench, I also added on the sensors to the refueling boom. This is again just something you need a little bit of super glue for and some debonder afterwards to clean it all up. This is also an ideal area to put a 3D printed GoPro if you wanted to replicate some of the Blackhawks you can find online. Now, one of the coolest things about the Blackhawk helicopter is it was designed to survive a crash. If you know anything about helicopters, you know that as soon as they leave the factory, they're just a few thousand parts flying in formation. And if that fan stops spinning over the pilots' heads, they start to sweat. So what does that exactly mean for the Blackhawk? When you look at the landing gear, there is a really long stroke to that shock. And when you look at the seats for the crew and even the passengers, they are designed to absorb a lot of the impact forces in a crash, increasing the survivability of the people inside. So moving back to painting, you can see here on the right is my Tamiya NATO black that I used for the base. And on the left, that's a custom mix I've made for German armor, and it's a little bit lighter than that NATO black. So I use this to start adding some variance into the paint. The idea here is I'm trying to replicate that worn look of the paint, and now that I have a lighter color down where the paint's really fading, I can come in with a darker color to show the touch-ups. And if you're not happy with this or it's too extreme, you can always use that original color as a thin blend coat to push everything back. The decals for this kit do go down really well, The only problem is some of the registry was off, so on some of the decals there is a little bit of an outline around them. But once you start getting into some weathering, you can hide that pretty well. In order to get the resin guns to stick to the plastic model, I drilled a hole in the side of the gun and put in a brass wire to hold it in place. After letting the decals sit for a full 24 hours, it was time to seal all of them and the paint with a flat coat, and for this I used Tamiya's Flat Clear. Now it's time to unmask the clear parts, and unfortunately there's always a little bit of dust that gets inside the canopy. I'm not sure how that happens, but it usually seems to find a way. But the nice thing about having the doors off is I can just take a Q-tip and give those a quick wipe. The kit wheels are okay, but over on Cults 3D, Fonch's Models has done a new set for his H60 he did in 1/35th scale, so I just had to scale those down. One unique thing about helicopter tires is they always look flat to me, but it turns out that's the norm because there is so much weight in those aircraft. The kit rotor head looks pretty good as well. I improved the look of this just using, again, some copper wire, but if I were to build this model again, I think I would get a 3D part because there's a lot more detail. Rotor heads are just one of those things that are mechanically awesome to look at. Unfortunately for this build though, it wasn't until I installed the wires that someone else pointed out to me that I had my hydraulic cables running to the wrong part of the rotor head. So next time I'll have to make sure I fix that. For this antenna that sits on the back of the helicopter, I just ran it across a sanding stick a few times to thin it down. For the rotor blades, I painted those with Tamiya's Rubber Black and then added a few drops of black just to darken up the rotor hub itself to add some interest. Then the miniguns were painted with Mr. Metal Color Iron. To break up all the black, all the bolt heads were then painted with silver from AK Real Color. And then it was time to improve on another kit part. The chaff buckets in the kit are okay, but I got into Fusion and after a few hours had designed some replacements that were a little bit thinner and a little more in scale. These ones here look like they're made out of cast iron. Once glued to the side of the aircraft, I then ran the cables into the bungs on the side of the boom. Now here's another area that some references showed those connectors below the chaff buckets, but then I found a few that showed them above. And where ICM molded those on the kit, it made more sense to run the cables there. I'm not the scale scriber. I'm not going to take the time to try to clean up that bung and then scribe it into a different place. I used lead wire to create the cables, and I was able to mold those and bend those into the directions I want. If this was a bigger scale, like 1/35th, I would actually design the P-clamps as well and put those in place. To get the correct effect on this sensor, I first painted it with Mr. Metal Color Super Chrome Silver, and then covered it with a blend coat of Tamiya Clear Orange and Red. The reason I don't use just a flat black paint for the model is I need to be able to get a wash into the panel lines and have that stand out. So for this panel line, I used a mix of Abteilung Smoke and Lampshade Black. That just makes it a little bit darker than the rest of the aircraft and helps everything pop out for some contrast. The nice thing about an oil-based wash is I can just come in with some enamel thinner afterwards and clean everything up to make it nice and tidy. Or just wipe it away with a cloth, whichever is easier. Now for my overall view on the ICM MH-60 kit, I asked myself the one key question: would I build this kit again? And the answer is yes. Now that I've picked up all the areas where there's going to be some challenges and some gotchas, I would have no problem building this kit again. And in fact, I hope they come out with a Pavehawk, which is my favorite version of the Blackhawk, or even a Seahawk, just to be able to do a naval variant. This kit does look challenging when you first look at it and you're looking at the instructions, but you just have to take your time test fitting things before you commit them to glue. Even the cabin wasn't too bad trying to get the seats in place. By just gluing the tops and leaving the bottoms loose, you are able to guide them in place. Just keep in mind, I did not do the entire troop transport setup in the cabin. I just did the crew chief seats, and even those had some challenges. But again, it's like anything, you can just take some time. ICM has done a really good job capturing the look of the Blackhawk, and I would definitely recommend this kit for people that are a fan of the Blackhawk and want to get one on their shelf. So in closing, I just wanted to thank ICM again for sending me this kit. I really appreciated the opportunity and hope we get to do it again. And for you, the viewers, thank you again for watching. I hope this video gave you an answer if you wanted to build this kit or not. I hope it helps you out. That'll be it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you're in the Salt Lake City area on June 20th, 21st, I will be at the Rocky Mountain Hobby Expo. Definitely say hi. There will be some great modelers there putting on different seminars for you to check out. And they even have me doing one, which is kind of odd. So that's it for now. Be sure to follow me on Instagram as Robbie the Model Guy or Facebook, or leave a comment in the comment section below. Let me know what you thought of this video, thought of the Blackhawk, and I will do my best to reply to you. See you next time.